The massive ships appeared in Earth's orbit on a Tuesday morning, blocking out the sun over 3 continents. They were enormous, each one the size of a small city, their hulls dark and angular like shards of obsidian floating in space. Across the planet, sirens wailed and news anchors stammered through breaking reports. Humanity's first contact with alien life had finally happened, and it looked exactly like every invasion movie ever made. In the United Nations headquarters in New York, Secretary General Maria Chen stood at the window of her office, watching the shadows of the alien vessels move across the city below. Her phone had not stopped ringing for the past hour. World leaders, military commanders, scientists, and religious figures all wanted answers she did not have. Behind her, the Emergency Council had assembled, their faces pale and drawn. "They're broadcasting on all frequencies," said Director James Park from the Communications Division. He pressed a button, and a voice filled the room. It was deep and resonant, translated by some technology into perfect English, Mandarin, Spanish, Arabic, and dozens of other languages simultaneously. "People of Earth, I am War Commander Drakthor of the Zarthek Imperium. For 12,000 cycles, my people have brought order to the chaos of the galaxy. We have unified 647 species under our banner. We bring law, peace, and prosperity to all who accept our guidance." Maria exchanged glances with the others in the room. The word guidance hung in the air like a threat. The voice continued, cold and formal. "Your planet has been identified as suitable for incorporation into the Imperium. You will submit your governments to Imperial authority. You will cease all military activities. You will provide a full census of your population and resources. You have 48 Earth hours to comply. Failure to do so will result in the destruction of your military installations, followed by planetary bombardment until compliance is achieved. This is the way it has always been done. This is the way it will be done with you." The transmission ended. Silence filled the room for several long seconds. Then someone laughed. It was a short, sharp sound, almost a bark of surprise. Everyone turned to look at Ambassador David Okoye from Nigeria, who had his hand over his mouth, his eyes wide with shock at his own reaction. "I'm sorry," he said quickly. "I'm sorry, that was inappropriate. It's just..." Did anyone else think that sounded like a terrible sales pitch? Another laugh came from across the room. Then another. Within moments, despite the gravity of the situation, nearly half the room was chuckling nervously. The absurdity of it was too much. Aliens had traveled across the stars to give humanity a corporate merger ultimatum. Maria felt the corner of her own mouth twitch. She fought it down and cleared her throat. "Ladies and gentlemen, please. We need to respond to this threat seriously." "Oh, I am being serious," said Ambassador Yuki Tanaka from Japan, still smiling. "They gave us 48 hours and a checklist. They think we're going to just, what? Fill out some forms and hand over the planet? They've done this 647 times before," said General Morrison, the American military representative. His tone was grim, but there was something calculating in his eyes. "They have a process, they're following a script." "Which means they've never had anyone go off script," said Dr. Amara Okonkwo, the head of the newly formed Xenological Studies Department. She had been a historian before this morning. Now she was humanity's closest thing to an expert on alien civilizations. Think about it. 12,000 years, 647 species. They've perfected this. They know exactly what to say to make people afraid. Except we've heard this before. Maria finished the thought. In our own history. Repeatedly. The room fell silent again. But this time it was a different kind of silence. It was the silence of people making connections, seeing patterns, understanding something fundamental. "We should respond," Maria said finally. She looked at Director Park. "Can we transmit back to them?" "Yes, Madam Secretary. We've been able to match their frequency." "Good." Maria straightened her jacket and walked to the communications station. "Put me through." A holographic screen flickered to life, showing the interior of the alien flagship. War Commander Drakthor sat on what could only be described as a throne, surrounded by officers in elaborate armor. He was large, perhaps 8 feet tall with gray-scaled skin and eyes like molten gold. His face was angular and sharp, with a ridge of bone running from his brow to the back of his skull. He looked at Maria with an expression that might have been boredom. "You are the leader of this world?" "I represent the United Nations, which is an organization of the governments of Earth," Maria said calmly. "I'm authorized to speak on behalf of humanity for the purposes of this first contact. Then you will deliver your world's surrender to me now, and we can avoid unnecessary destruction." Maria smiled. It was not a friendly smile. "War Commander, before we discuss surrender, I have a question. Have you actually researched our species at all?" Drakthor's golden eyes narrowed. "We have scanned your planet. We know your population numbers, your technological level, your military capabilities. You have primitive fusion weapons and basic chemical rockets. You have not achieved faster than light travel. You are exactly where you appear to be in your development." "I see. And based on that scan, you decided we would be easy to intimidate." "All species are easy to intimidate when faced with superior force," Drakthor said. His tone suggested he was explaining something obvious to a child. "Your world has approximately 8 billion inhabitants. My flagship alone carries weapons that could eliminate half that number in a single day. Surrender is logical. It is the only rational choice." "Fascinating," Maria said. She gestured to someone off screen. "Commander, we're going to send you some files. Historical records, cultural documentation, that sort of thing. I strongly suggest you review them before your deadline expires." For the first time, Drakthor looked uncertain. "What purpose would this serve?" "Call it due diligence," Maria said. "You're asking us to make a very big decision. The least we can do is make sure you understand who you're dealing with. Unless you're not interested in understanding your newest subjects." Drakthor's face hardened. "Send your files. They will not change the outcome. 47 hours and 52 minutes remain." The transmission ended. Maria let out a long breath and turned to face the room full of staring faces. Did we just buy ourselves time by giving homework to an alien invasion force? Ambassador Okoye asked. "Yes," Maria said. "And now we need to decide what to teach them." For the next 6 hours, the greatest minds on Earth assembled in the UN building and its virtual conference rooms. Historians, military strategists, psychologists, anthropologists, and more gathered to create a crash course in human civilization. The assignment was simple and terrifying. Explain humanity to beings who thought conquest was routine. "We need to show them we're not worth the trouble," said one general. "No," countered Dr. Okonkwo. "We need to show them we're not like anything they've encountered before. There's a difference." The debate raged. Some wanted to showcase humanity's capacity for violence as a deterrent. Others wanted to emphasize culture, art, and philosophy to appeal to whatever sense of value the Imperium might have. Eventually, a framework emerged. They would show the Zarthek exactly what they asked for: a complete picture of humanity. The good, the bad, and the absolutely terrifying. The file package that went up to the flagship was enormous. It contained everything from cave paintings to nuclear test footage. Agricultural development timelines sat next to documentation of the world wars. Moon landing broadcasts were included alongside records of ancient empires rising and falling. Philosophy texts, religious documents, scientific papers, military, histories, and cultural records from every corner of the planet. And buried in all of it, like a thread running through fabric, was a pattern. Humans fought. Humans fought each other, fought nature, fought diseases, fought ideas they didn't like. Humanity had nearly destroyed itself dozens of times and kept going. They had created weapons capable of ending all life on their planet and chose to keep living anyway. "Do you think they'll understand?" asked Ambassador Tanaka as they transmitted the final files. "I don't know," Maria admitted. "But I know one thing. Every species in their empire probably begged for mercy or tried to negotiate from weakness. We're about to do something different." "What's that?" "We're going to show them our resume." Aboard the flagship Eternal Dominion, War Commander Drakthor watched the first files with mild curiosity. He had seen countless species histories before. They were all essentially the same. Slow development, tribal conflicts that resolved into peaceful cooperation, the building of civilization, and then contact with the Imperium. Some fought briefly before surrendering. Most simply capitulated immediately when they saw the power arrayed against them. The human files started normally enough. Primitive tribes, early agriculture, the formation of cities, standard progression. Drakthor began to lose interest. Then the numbers started appearing that made him pause. A conflict called World War I had killed 17 million people. He read the number 3 times. 17 million. In a 4-year period. He checked the planetary population at that time. Less than 2 billion. They had killed nearly 1% of their entire species in a single conflict. That cannot be correct, he said to Sub-Commander Velkara, his second in command. Verify this data. Velkara worked at a console for several minutes, cross-referencing the human records with the ship's sensors, checking for historical evidence, looking for any sign of deception. Commander, the data appears accurate. The battlefields still show evidence of the destruction. The chemical weapons they deployed are still detectable in the soil. The humans fought this war with technology barely above metal forging and chemical explosives. Drakthor felt something he had not felt in decades of conquest. It was not fear, not exactly. It was something closer to confusion. Why would they fight so destructively? What was the territorial dispute? The files indicate it was triggered by an assassination, Commander. One individual killed by another, causing alliance networks to activate, resulting in a planetary conflict. That is insane. Yes, Commander. And there is more. 21 years later, they fought another world war. This one killed approximately 70 to 85 million people. The throne room fell silent. Drakthor's officers stared at their commander, waiting for him to explain how this was possible. He had no explanation. Continue analysis, he ordered, his voice tight. I want to understand these beings before we proceed. As the hours passed, the reports grew more disturbing. The humans had created weapons called nuclear bombs and used them on themselves. They had developed biological warfare agents. They had designed poison gas, landmines, cluster bombs, and dozens of other weapons, whose only purpose was maximum destruction. But what truly shook Drakthor was not the weapons. It was the scale of human ambition and violence. The Zarthek Imperium had fought wars across the stars for millennia, but those wars were calculated affairs. You destroyed military targets, accepted surrender, and moved on. Civilian casualties were minimized because subjects had value, planets had value. Humans seemed to have looked at the concept of war and asked themselves, what if we tried to make this as horrible as possible? What if we deliberately targeted civilians? What if we burned entire cities? What if we created weapons that poisoned the land for generations? And then somehow they had pulled back from the brink. They had created international laws. They had formed global organizations. They had chosen barely not to annihilate themselves. This species is unstable, Velkara said quietly. They are dangerous, Commander. Not to us, perhaps, but to themselves. They need the structure of the Imperium. Drakthor wanted to agree. It was the standard logic. Find chaos, bring order, expand the Empire. But something nagged at him as he watched more of the human records. There was a transmission from something called the Apollo 11 mission. A human had stepped onto their moon and said they came in peace for all mankind. This was only decades after they had dropped nuclear weapons on their own cities. They were capable of unimaginable violence and profound hope, apparently at the same time. Sir, said the communications officer, the deadline approaches. 30 minutes remain. Should I broadcast the final warning? Drakthor looked at the data scrolling across his screens. 12,000 years of conquest had taught him to read species quickly. Humans should have been simple. They were primitive, divided, and violent. They should have surrendered immediately when they saw the fleet. But they had not surrendered. They had laughed. And then they had sent him their history like it was a warning. Open a channel to the surface, he said. I wish to speak to their leader again. Maria Chen had not slept. She stood in the same spot she had been 18 hours ago, watching the alien ships through her window. Around her, the Emergency Council had grown to include representatives from every major nation on Earth. They waited in silence for the inevitable. When Drakthor's face appeared on the screen again, he looked different. More tense, less certain. Human leader, he said. I have reviewed your files. And? Maria kept her voice steady. I do not understand your species. You fight wars that nearly destroy you, then work together to explore space. You create weapons that could end all life on your world, then choose not to use them. You are divided into hundreds of factions, yet you speak with one voice to me now. Explain this contradiction. Maria allowed herself a small smile. War Commander, there is no contradiction. We're just human. We make terrible mistakes and somehow learn from them. We fight each other, but we also save each other. We're messy and complicated and sometimes crazy. That's what makes us what we are. Your world is chaos, Drakthor said. But there was a question in his tone now rather than a certainty. Our world is free, Maria corrected gently. And we'd like to keep it that way. Drakthor was quiet for a long moment. The deadline has passed, he finally said. By all protocol, I should begin bombardment of your military sites. You could do that, Maria agreed. But I don't think you will. Because you've realized something, haven't you? You've conquered 647 species, and you've probably never had to actually fight any of them. They saw your ships and surrendered. But we're not going to do that, and you're not sure what happens next if you attack a species that's willing to fight wars like we do. The silence stretched out. Every person in the UN building held their breath. I am transmitting a request to Imperial High Command, Drakthor said slowly, requesting guidance on how to proceed with a species of uncertain stability and aggressive tendencies. Until I receive new orders, no hostile action will be taken. But make no mistake, human. This is not surrender on our part. This is assessment. Take all the time you need, Commander, Maria said. We're not going anywhere, and neither, I think, are you. The transmission ended. The room erupted in noise, people shouting and cheering and crying with relief. Maria simply stood at the window, looking up at the alien ships that still blocked the sun. They had bought time. But time for what? What came next? The galaxy was watching Earth now. And humanity, for better or worse, had just introduced itself in the most human way possible, by being absolutely impossible to predict. The Eternal Dominion had been designed for conquest, not for sitting in orbit while its commander waited for orders. The crew grew restless. Warriors who trained every day for combat now spent their time analyzing data about a species that made less sense the more they learned about them. War Commander. Drakthor had not left the command deck in 3 days. He sat on his throne, surrounded by holographic displays showing different aspects of human civilization. Each new piece of information seemed to contradict the last. These humans were the most confusing species he had encountered in 40 years of service to the Imperium. Sub-Commander Velkara approached with another report, her scales showing the purple tinge of concern. Commander, the analysis team has finished reviewing human military doctrine. You need to see this. Drakthor gestured for her to proceed. A hologram materialized in the center of the command deck, showing various human military strategies throughout their history. We began with recent conflicts as you ordered, Velkara explained. The humans have fought continuously for their entire recorded history. Over 14,000 documented wars in the past 5,000 years alone. But it is not the number that disturbs us. It is the nature of how they fight. The hologram shifted to show footage from something called the Second World War. Cities burning, massive armies clashing, civilians fleeing from devastation. Drakthor had seen it before, but the analysis team had added new context. In Imperium warfare, we target military installations, capture leaders, and accept surrender. Velkara continued. We minimize casualties because subjects have economic value. We avoid destroying infrastructure because we will need it. Our wars typically have casualty rates below 1% of engaged forces. This is standard practice across all civilized species, Drakthor said. Warfare is a tool of policy, not an end unto itself. Yes, Commander, but humans developed something they call total war. It means the complete mobilization of all resources, military and civilian, toward victory. It means treating the enemy's entire population, their entire economy, their entire civilization as legitimate targets. Drakthor leaned forward. That would be economically catastrophic for both sides. The humans know this. They do it anyway. In their Second World War, they deliberately bombed civilian populations to break morale. They burned entire cities. They destroyed factories, farms, and homes. The war killed 3% of the entire planetary population. 70 million dead. A tactical officer spoke up from his station. Commander, We have analyzed the strategic value of this approach. It makes no sense. The destruction of civilian infrastructure reduces the value of conquest. The mass casualties create resistance movements. The resources spent on such warfare could be better used in a dozen other ways. Yet they did it anyway, Drakthor said quietly. Why? Because they were fighting for survival, said another voice. Science Officer Krelmar stepped forward, his elderly face showing the gray scales of wisdom. I have been studying their psychological profiles. Humans do not fight wars the way we do. When we fight, we calculate cost versus benefit. When humans fight, they fight with something they call total commitment. They will destroy themselves rather than submit to an enemy they hate. The command deck fell silent. This was not how rational species behaved. Krelmar continued, pulling up more files. Consider their nuclear weapons. The humans developed bombs that could destroy cities in seconds. Terrible weapons, but efficient. Then they learned these bombs could trigger something called nuclear winter that might end most life on their planet. Their response was to build thousands more of these weapons. That is suicide, Velkara said. They call it mutually assured destruction, Krelmar replied. The doctrine states that if one side attacks, both sides die. It is insane. It is also the only thing that prevented them from using these weapons on each other. They created a peace based on the promise of total annihilation. Drakthor stood from his throne and walked to the holographic displays. He touched one, expanding it to show a map of Earth with markers indicating nuclear weapons locations. There were thousands of markers. How many of these weapons do they currently possess? Approximately 13,000 warheads, Commander. Most are in storage, but enough are active to destroy every major city on their planet several times over. They have had this capability for nearly 80 Earth years. And they have not used them on each other? Not since the first two, which ended a war. Since then, there have been many close calls. Times when weapons were nearly launched due to accidents, misunderstandings, or political tension. Each time, individual humans made the choice not to fire. They came close to extinction dozens of times and chose survival instead. Drakthor felt something he rarely experienced: genuine uncertainty. The Imperium had rules for dealing with aggressive species. You demonstrated superior force, accepted their surrender, and incorporated them into the Empire. Simple, clean, effective. But humans had seen superior force before. They had aimed it at themselves, and somehow decided to keep existing anyway. There is more, Commander, Krelmar said, his voice grim. We found records of something called Unit 731, and the Holocaust, and the Holodomor, and the Rwandan genocide. Humans have repeatedly committed atrocities against their own kind. Deliberately, systematically, with industrial efficiency. Show me. What followed was the most disturbing hour of Drakthor's life. The Imperium could be ruthless when necessary, but there were rules. You did not torture for its own sake. You did not create systems designed purely to inflict suffering. You did not build factories of death. Humans had done all of this. To each other. They are monsters, Velkara whispered. No, Krelmar said softly. That is what makes them so frightening. They are not monsters. After each of these events, other humans were horrified. They created laws to prevent it from happening again. They put the perpetrators on trial. They built memorials to remember the victims. They taught their children that these acts were evil and must never be repeated. Then they understand morality, Drakthor said. They understand it better than we do, Commander. Because they have seen the alternative. We have ruled the galaxy for 12,000 years through strength and order. We do not commit atrocities because we never needed to. We are civilized because we have never faced the choice to be otherwise. Humans have faced that choice repeatedly. They have chosen wrongly many times, but they keep choosing to try again. The command deck was completely silent now. Every officer present was trying to process what they were learning. These humans were not simply primitive or violent. They were something unprecedented in the galaxy, a species that had seen the depths of evil and deliberately climbed back out. Commander, said the communications officer, breaking the tension, we are receiving a transmission from Imperial High Command. It is marked urgent and classified. Drakthor returned to his throne. Put it through. Privacy mode. The hologram shifted to show Grand Admiral Zekthar, one of the 7 high commanders who led the entire Imperium. He was ancient, his scales nearly white with age, but his eyes were sharp and intelligent. War Commander Drakthor, the Grand Admiral said formally, I have reviewed your reports on the human situation. I have also reviewed the data files the humans provided. This is an unprecedented first contact scenario. Yes, Grand Admiral. I await your orders. My orders are simple. Do nothing. Make no threats. Take no hostile action. Continue to observe and gather information. Under no circumstances are you to attack this species until we understand them better. Drakthor felt shock ripple through him. Grand Admiral, with respect, we have never delayed conquest before. The humans are primitive. We could... Could what? Zekthar interrupted sharply. Could we bomb their cities? Yes. Could we destroy their military? Probably. Could we occupy their planet? Perhaps. But what would happen then? You have read their history. You know what happens when humans are invaded. They resist. They fight. They create insurgencies that last generations. And unlike every other species we have conquered, humans seem willing to die rather than submit. They are one planet, Grand Admiral. We are an empire of 647 worlds. And they have nuclear weapons pointed at themselves right now. What do you think happens if we invade and they decide to use those weapons? Not against us, against their own world. A species willing to commit suicide rather than surrender is not a species we want to fight unless absolutely necessary. The logic was undeniable. Drakthor had been thinking of Earth as a conquest target. Zekthar was thinking of it as a potential catastrophe. There is another issue, the Grand Admiral continued. Other species in the Imperium are watching this situation. For 12,000 years they have accepted our rule because resistance seemed futile. But now they are seeing a species stand up to us. A primitive species that makes us hesitate. If we attack and it goes badly, if we take significant casualties, or if the conquest takes longer than usual, it will encourage rebellion across the Empire. Then what do you suggest, Grand Admiral? I suggest we do something the Imperium has never done before. We wait, we learn. We consider the possibility that humanity might be more useful as an ally than as a subject. This is a decision that will be made by the full High Command Council, not by battlefield commanders. Your job is to keep the situation stable until we decide on a new approach. The transmission ended. Drakthor sat in his throne, processing this new reality. The Imperium was afraid, not of human weapons, but of human unpredictability. They had finally met a species they could not simply conquer and move on. Velkara approached cautiously. Commander, what are your orders? Continue analysis, Drakthor said. But expand the scope. I want to understand not just how humans fight, but how they think, what they value, what they dream about. If we are to wait, then we will use that time to truly understand these beings. Over the next several days, the analysis teams dug deeper into human culture. What they found was even more confusing than the military history. Humans created art about war and art about peace. They wrote songs celebrating heroism and songs protesting violence. They made movies about alien invasions where the aliens were always defeated. They had thousands of religions, all claiming different truths, yet somehow most humans did not kill each other over these differences anymore. Science officer Krelmar became particularly fascinated by human philosophy. Listen to this, Commander. A human named Gandhi once said, "An eye for an eye makes the whole world blind." He led a movement to free his people from oppressors using only nonviolent resistance. It worked. Impossible, Velkara said. You cannot defeat military force without military force. Yet he did. And another human named Martin Luther King did something similar. They won their battles by refusing to fight them in traditional ways. They made their enemies look cruel and themselves look noble. They changed their societies through moral pressure. But these are the same humans who built nuclear weapons, Drakthor said. Exactly, Commander. That is what we keep missing. Humans contain multitudes. They are violent and peaceful, cruel and kind, destructive and creative. They are contradictions that somehow function. Every time we think we understand them, we find something that proves we were wrong. A tactical officer interrupted. Commander, we have detected increased activity on Earth. The humans are launching satellites and space stations at an accelerated rate. They appear to be militarizing their orbital space. Show me. The hologram displayed Earth's orbital region. Dozens of new objects were being launched every day. Not weapons, from what sensors could tell, but construction materials, fuel depots, and what looked like the beginnings of defensive platforms. They are preparing for war, Velkara said. Or preparing for peace, Krelmar countered. We have been sitting in their orbit for a week. They know we have not left. Perhaps they are simply making sure they have options. Drakthor made a decision. Open a channel to the surface to Secretary General Chen. When Maria Chen's face appeared on the screen, she looked tired but alert. Drakthor noticed that the human leaders had not left their posts either. They were as committed to this standoff as he was. War Commander, Maria said, have you received your orders? I have. We are to maintain our current position and continue our assessment. But I am curious about your orbital construction. Are you preparing defenses? Maria smiled slightly. Would you be doing anything different in our position? You're sitting above our planet with enough firepower to destroy us. We're making sure we have the ability to at least make you think twice about using it. You cannot defeat my fleet. Probably not, Maria agreed calmly. But we could make it expensive. And we could make sure the galaxy knows exactly what happened. You might win, Commander, but everyone would see how hard we made you work for it. Is that the image the Imperium wants to project? That it took weeks to conquer one primitive planet? Drakthor felt something he had not expected. Respect. This human understood strategy. Not just military strategy, but political strategy. She was fighting a battle on multiple fronts, and the battlefield was not Earth's surface, but the minds of everyone watching. You are clever, he admitted. We're motivated, Maria corrected. There's a difference. Cleverness is about intelligence. Motivation is about survival. We're very good at surviving, Commander. It's kind of our thing. I have been studying your history, your wars, your weapons, your capacity for violence. And I do not understand how you have survived this long. By all logic, you should have destroyed yourselves centuries ago. Maria's expression softened. You want to know the secret? It's not complicated. We keep choosing not to destroy ourselves. Every day we make that choice. Sometimes by a narrow margin, sometimes by pure luck. But we keep choosing life over death. That's what makes us human. The Imperium brings order to chaos. We could help your species avoid the mistakes you keep making. Commander, with all due respect, you're making a big assumption. What assumption is that? That we think our mistakes are bugs instead of features. Yes, we mess up. Yes, we fight. Yes, we nearly destroy ourselves on a regular basis. But every time we do, we learn something. We grow. We change. Your empire has been the same for 12,000 years. You've perfected conquest, but you've stopped evolving. We're messy, but we're alive in a way you might have forgotten how to be. The transmission ended at Maria's signal, leaving Drakthor staring at the empty screen. Around him, his officers looked uncertain. They had been trained to conquer, not to contemplate. She is right, Krelmar said into the silence. The Imperium has not truly changed in millennia. We expand, but we do not grow. We are stable, but perhaps we are also stagnant. That is seditious talk, Science Officer, Velkara warned. Is it? Or is it simply observation? The humans have forced us to question our methods for the first time in centuries. Perhaps that is valuable in itself. Drakthor stood and walked to the observation window, looking down at the blue planet below. Somewhere on that world, 8 billion humans were going about their lives refusing to surrender, refusing to submit, refusing to be anything other than exactly what they were. The Imperium had conquered the galaxy by force, but force only worked when the enemy feared it more than they valued their freedom. Humans, it seemed, valued their freedom quite highly. Continue all observations, Drakthor ordered, and prepare a detailed report for Imperial High Command. They need to understand what we are dealing with here. As his crew returned to their duties, Drakthor remained at the window. For the first time in his long career, He wondered if conquest was truly inevitable, or if the Imperium had finally met a species that would force them to consider a different path. The galaxy was watching, and it was waiting to see what would happen when an unstoppable force met an unmovable object that refused to take anything seriously. The standoff entered its third week. Earth's orbit had become a strange kind of diplomatic no-man's land, where human construction crews worked on defensive platforms, while Zarthek ships watched with their weapons powered down. It was neither war nor peace, but something uncomfortable in between. In the UN headquarters, Maria Chen had finally allowed herself to go home for a few hours of sleep. In her absence, the Emergency Council had expanded into a full-scale crisis management operation that ran around the clock. Scientists worked with military leaders. Diplomats consulted with psychologists. Engineers built things that might never be used but had to exist anyway. Dr. Amara Okonkwo stood in front of a massive display showing everything humanity had learned about the Zarthek Imperium. It was not much, but it was enough to see patterns. The Imperium conquered through overwhelming displays of force. They had never lost a war because no one had ever seriously fought them. They were the galactic equivalent of a bully who had never been punched back. "We need to change the equation," she said to the assembled military commanders. "They're waiting for orders from their leadership. That means they're uncertain. That's our opportunity." General Morrison leaned back in his chair. "What are you suggesting, Doctor? That we attack? Because I've seen the analysis. We might take down one of their ships if we're lucky and throw everything we have at it. Then they annihilate us. I'm not suggesting we attack. I'm suggesting we demonstrate. Demonstrate what? That we understand their technology better than they think we do. That we're not primitives who got lucky. That we're a genuine threat if they push us." Ambassador Okoye raised an eyebrow. "You want to show off? That seems risky." "Everything is risky right now," Dr. Okonkwo replied. "But consider their position. They've been sitting in our orbit for 3 weeks. They have to justify this delay to their superiors. Right now they can say they're assessing an unknown threat. But if we prove we're not actually a threat, they have no reason not to attack. However, if we prove we are a credible threat, they have every reason to keep talking." The room fell silent as people processed this logic. It was twisted, but it made sense. The Imperium respected strength. Humanity needed to demonstrate strength without actually starting a fight. "What did you have in mind?" Maria asked. She had returned earlier than expected, looking tired but determined. Dr. Okonkwo pulled up a series of technical diagrams. "Our scientists have been analyzing every second of footage we have of their ships. We've learned a lot. Their shields, their weapons, their propulsion systems, they're all incredibly advanced, but they're also designed for a specific type of warfare. They're built to fight other ships in space, not to operate in contested environments." "Meaning?" General Morrison prompted. "Meaning they have weaknesses they probably don't even know about because no one has ever exploited them. Their shields are optimized for directed energy weapons and kinetic projectiles in vacuum. They're less effective against certain types of electromagnetic interference. Their ships are massive and powerful, but they can't maneuver well in strong gravitational fields. And their weapons, while devastating, have a recharge cycle that leaves them vulnerable for approximately 8 seconds after each major discharge." The military commanders leaned forward, suddenly very interested. "You're saying we could fight them?" one asked. "I'm saying we could make them regret fighting us," Dr. Okonkwo corrected. "There's a difference. We want them to look at Earth and think, is conquering this planet worth the cost? Let's make sure the answer is no." Over the next 48 hours, humanity prepared the most important demonstration in its history. They did not prepare an attack. They prepared a message. The location chosen was an abandoned military base in the Nevada desert. It had once been used for nuclear testing decades ago. Now it would serve as a stage for a very different kind of test. War Commander Drakthor received the invitation directly from Maria Chen. "Commander, we would like to invite you in a delegation from your ship to observe a demonstration of human defensive capabilities. We will transport you to the surface, show you what we've been building, and return you safely. Consider it educational." Drakthor consulted with his officers. It could be a trap, but his sensors showed no unusual military buildup in the area, and the humans had been cooperative if stubborn throughout this entire encounter. "I will attend," he decided. "But if this is treachery, then you'll destroy us and the galaxy will say we deserved it," Maria finished. We know we're not planning treachery, Commander. We're planning honesty. Sometimes that's more frightening. The human transport arrived at the Eternal Dominion shortly after. It was a primitive chemical rocket design, but it functioned adequately. Drakthor brought Sub-Commander Velkara and Science Officer Krelmar with him, along with a security detail of 6 warriors. The humans who greeted them on the surface were polite and professional. Maria Chen was there, along with several military officers and scientists. They wore no ceremonial armor, carried no visible weapons, and treated the aliens like visiting dignitaries rather than potential invaders. "Welcome to Earth, Commander," Maria said, extending her hand in the human gesture of greeting. Drakthor had studied this custom. He reached out and grasped her hand briefly. Her grip was firm but not aggressive. "This is an interesting location you have chosen," Drakthor observed, looking at the desert landscape. "Remote, unpopulated, easily destroyed without significant collateral damage." "Exactly," Maria agreed cheerfully. "We thought you might appreciate the consideration." "This way, please." They were led to an observation bunker overlooking a vast testing range. Through reinforced windows, Drakthor could see several targets set up at various distances. Some were clearly meant to represent ships. Others looked like fortified structures. "What are we here to see?" Velkara asked suspiciously. "Options," said General Morrison. "We've spent the last 3 weeks thinking about your ships, analyzing them, understanding them. We thought you should see what we've learned." A human technician approached Maria and spoke quietly. She nodded and turned to the aliens. "We're ready to begin. First demonstration, electromagnetic pulse weaponry. On the range, a device activated." Drakthor's instruments immediately registered a massive electromagnetic surge. Several of the target ships, replicas built to match Zarthek sensor profiles, shut down completely. Lights went dark. "Systems failed. Your shields are excellent against physical projectiles and energy beams," Dr. Okonkwo explained, "but they're vulnerable to broad-spectrum EM pulses. We've calculated that a properly tuned pulse could disable your systems for approximately 20 minutes, more than enough time to either escape or follow up with conventional weapons." Drakthor felt his scales tighten. "That is a theoretical vulnerability. You cannot generate such a pulse with enough strength to affect our ships. Can't we?" Maria gestured. "Show them the yield calculations." Numbers appeared on a screen. Drakthor read them twice, then had Krelmar verify them. The humans were right. They could generate such pulses. The weapons were crude and short-ranged, but they would work. "Second demonstration," General Morrison announced. "Kinetic kill vehicles." This time, the test was more visibly dramatic. A projectile launched from a railgun installation struck one of the target ships at incredible velocity. The impact was devastating, tearing through the replica hull with ease. "No explosives," Morrison explained. "Just mass and velocity. Your shields are designed to disperse energy from explosions and beams. They're less effective against solid projectiles moving at significant fractions of light speed. We've been launching these types of weapons into space for decades. We call them satellites. It would take us approximately 3 days to retrofit them with guidance systems and turn our orbital infrastructure into a minefield." Velkara hissed softly, a Zarthek expression of concern. "You would destroy your own satellites? To protect our planet?" "Absolutely," Maria said. "We've destroyed worse things for less important reasons." The demonstrations continued. Directed energy weapons that exploited recharge gaps, swarm tactics using thousands of small drones, cyber warfare techniques designed to infiltrate ship computer systems, biological agents that could survive in vacuum and corrode hull materials. Each demonstration was accompanied by detailed analysis, showing exactly how it would be used against Zarthek ships. Nothing was vague. Nothing was boastful. It was a simple clinical explanation of how humanity would fight if forced to do so. "You are showing us how to defend against all of these tactics," Drakthor finally said. "Why?" "Because we don't want to use them," Maria replied simply. "We want you to understand that conquering Earth would be expensive. Not impossible, we're not delusional about the power difference here, but expensive. Expensive in ships, expensive in time, expensive in the attention of your empire, and most expensive in terms of how it would look to every other species watching this situation. You are attempting to make conquest economically unfeasible," Krelmar said with something that might have been admiration. "We're being practical," Dr. Okonkwo said. "You're a business as much as an empire. Every conquest has to be worth the investment. We're making sure Earth isn't worth it." The final demonstration was the most impressive. A massive screen activated, showing Earth's orbital space from multiple angles. Hundreds of satellites began moving in coordinated patterns, forming defensive formations, creating overlapping fields of fire, establishing communication relays. Our orbital infrastructure has been active for decades, General Morrison explained. Communication satellites, GPS networks, weather monitoring, scientific equipment. Over 5,000 objects in various orbits. For the past 3 weeks, we've been quietly adding to this network and, more importantly, linking it together. Every satellite is now part of a coordinated defense grid. They're not weapons yet, but they could be within 72 hours. You have militarized your entire orbital space in 3 weeks, Drakthor said slowly. We've prepared to militarize it, Maria corrected. There's a difference. Right now, those satellites are doing exactly what they've always done, helping humans communicate, navigate, and understand our world. But if necessary, they become weapons. It's deterrence, Commander, the same principle that has kept us from nuclear war for 80 years. You could attack us, but you'd have to fight through a prepared defense to do it. Drakthor turned away from the displays to face Maria directly. You have made your point. You are not helpless, but you are also not a match for the Imperium's full might. These defenses would delay us, not defeat us. How long would we delay you? Maria asked. A week, a month? And what would that delay cost you politically? The Imperium has been conquering one species after another for 12,000 years. How do you think your subjects will react when they see one primitive planet forcing you into a prolonged campaign? The truth of this hit Drakthor harder than any weapon demonstration. Political perception mattered. The Imperium ruled through the appearance of invincibility. A difficult conquest would crack that appearance. You are gambling, he said. You assume we care more about politics than victory. I'm not gambling at all, Maria replied. I'm reading the situation. Your high command ordered you to wait and assess. They wouldn't do that if they were confident in an easy victory. They're worried, Commander. Worried about casualties. Worried about time. Worried about what this looks like. We're simply making sure those worries are justified. Velkara stepped forward, her hand on her weapon. You speak boldly for a species that could be destroyed at any moment. Yes, I do, Maria agreed, not backing down. Because boldness is all we have. We can't match your technology. We can't match your experience. But we can make you stop and think. We can make you calculate cost versus benefit. And we can make sure that every species in the galaxy sees exactly what happens here. You would broadcast your own defeat? Krelmar asked. If it comes to that, yes. Let the galaxy see how hard you had to work for it. Let them see how much it cost you. Let them see that resistance is possible, even if it's ultimately unsuccessful. Sometimes the example matters more than the outcome. Drakthor understood then what the humans were really doing. They were not trying to win a military victory. They were trying to win a philosophical one. They were showing the galaxy that the Imperium could be challenged. That might be more dangerous to his empire than any weapon. This demonstration is concluded, he said formally. We will return to our ship. The journey back to orbit was silent. Drakthor's mind raced with implications. The humans had been clever. They had not shown him anything that was truly surprising. He had assumed they were developing defenses. But they had presented it in a way that made the political costs of conquest impossible to ignore. Back on the Eternal Dominion, Drakthor called an officer meeting. His senior staff assembled, waiting for orders. Assessment, he demanded. The humans are more capable than we initially believed, Velkara reported. Their defenses would not stop us, but they would inflict casualties. Projections suggest we would lose between 3 and 7 ships in the initial assault, with ongoing losses during occupation. 3 to 7 ships, Drakthor repeated. In 12,000 years of conquest, what is the most ships we have lost in a single campaign? 2 ships, Commander, during the conquest of the Velnari system, approximately 800 years ago. The silence in the command deck was profound. Losing 7 ships to conquer one primitive planet would be unprecedented. It would shatter assumptions that had held for millennia. There is another concern, Krelmar added. The humans mentioned broadcasting. I have been monitoring their communications networks. They are indeed transmitting everything, our arrival, our demands, their responses. Species across the galaxy are watching this situation unfold. Some of the Imperium's own subjects are discussing it openly. What are they saying? Drakthor demanded. They are inspired, Commander. They are seeing a species stand up to us. Some are even discussing whether they could do the same. This was the nightmare scenario, not a military defeat but a political awakening. The Imperium's power had always rested on the assumption that resistance was futile. Humanity was proving that assumption wrong. Send a message to Imperial High Command, Drakthor ordered. Mark it urgent. Tell them that military conquest of Earth is possible but inadvisable. The political costs outweigh the strategic benefits. Request permission to explore alternative options. Alternative options, Commander? Velkara asked carefully. Negotiation, alliance, trade agreements, anything other than conquest. Because if we conquer Earth now, we may lose the galaxy in the process. The message was sent. Now came the hardest part. Waiting for the Empire to make a decision it had never made before. On Earth, in the UN headquarters, Maria Chen watched the alien flagship through her window. She had no way of knowing what was happening up there, but she could see that the ship's weapons remained unpowered. That was something. Do you think it worked? Ambassador Okoye asked. I think we bought more time, Maria said. And in situations like this, time is the same thing as victory. Every day they don't attack is a day we get stronger. Every day they wait is a day their certainty erodes. We can't beat them in a fight, but maybe we can avoid the fight altogether. By making them afraid, by making them think. Fear is easy to overcome. Doubt is harder. We've given them doubt. Now we see what they do with it. Outside, construction continued in orbit. Humanity prepared for war while hoping for peace. Ready for violence while preferring conversation. It was the most human thing possible. Planning for the worst while working toward the best. The galaxy watched and waited to see which side would blink first, or if anyone would blink at all. The message from Imperial High Command took 6 days to arrive. 6 days during which War Commander Drakthor paced his command deck, reviewed data files, and tried not to think about the historical significance of what was happening. The Zarthek Imperium did not negotiate with species it intended to conquer. That had been true for 12 millennia, but it had also been true that no species had ever made the Imperium question whether conquest was worth the cost. When the transmission finally came through, it was not from Grand Admiral Zekthar, but from the full High Command Council. All 7 leaders of the Imperium appeared on the holographic display, their faces grave and formal. This was unprecedented. The Council rarely communicated directly with field commanders. War Commander Drakthor, the central figure, spoke. This was Supreme Commander Malketh, the oldest and most powerful member of the Council. His scales were pure white with age, and his eyes held the weight of centuries. We have reviewed your reports extensively. We have also monitored the broadcasts emanating from Earth and the reactions throughout the galaxy. This situation has evolved beyond a simple conquest scenario. Yes, Supreme Commander, Drakthor replied, maintaining formal military posture. You have asked permission to explore alternatives to military conquest. The Council has debated this request extensively. There are those who argue that any sign of weakness will encourage rebellion. There are others who argue that adapting to new situations is a sign of strength, not weakness. After much deliberation, we have reached a decision. Drakthor waited, barely breathing. The Imperium has always expanded through strength, Malketh continued. But strength takes many forms. Military might is only one type. Economic integration is another. Cultural exchange is a third. The humans have demonstrated that they possess valuable knowledge and capabilities. More importantly, they have demonstrated that conquering them would cost more than it would benefit us. Therefore, the Council has decided to authorize you to open formal negotiations with Earth's leadership. The command deck erupted in shocked murmurs. Velkara looked like she had been struck. Even Krelmar, who had advocated for understanding humanity, seemed stunned. Negotiations, Supreme Commander, Drakthor repeated, needing to be certain he understood correctly. Yes, you will propose a treaty of mutual recognition. Earth will not be incorporated into the Imperium. Instead, it will be recognized as an independent entity. In exchange, Earth will agree to peaceful relations, open trade, and cultural exchange with the Imperium. You will establish an embassy on their world, and they will be permitted to establish one within our space. Another council member spoke, a female commander named Sarvax. Be clear with them, War Commander. This is not surrender on our part. This is adaptation. We are strong enough to win the war, but wise enough to avoid fighting it. Make them understand the distinction. I understand, Commander, but may I ask, what changed the Council's mind? Supreme Commander Malketh's expression became thoughtful. What changed was information. We have been monitoring communications across the Imperium since you first made contact with Earth. We have seen our subject species discussing this situation. We have seen questions being raised that have not been raised in millennia. Questions about whether conquest is the only way to expand. Questions about whether subjects or partners are more valuable. The humans have not defeated us militarily, but they have defeated us philosophically. They have forced us to reconsider assumptions we took for granted. And if the humans refuse this offer, then we proceed with conquest and accept the costs involved. But we do not believe they will refuse. The humans seem to prefer talking to fighting, despite their capacity for both. Go. Make this historic negotiation succeed. The transmission ended. Drakthor stood in silence for a long moment, processing what had just happened. The Zarthek Imperium had just blinked. Not in fear, but in calculation. And somehow that felt more significant than any military victory. Contact Secretary General Chen, he ordered. Tell her I wish to meet in person, on her world, for formal negotiations. Maria Chen received the message while reviewing the latest construction reports from orbit. Humanity's defensive network was now at 73% operational capacity. In another week, it would be complete. They had bought just enough time. When she heard that Drakthor wanted to negotiate, she had to sit down. Around her, the emergency council erupted in excited chatter. They had done it. Somehow, impossibly, they had made an empire reconsider conquest. He wants to meet on Earth? Ambassador Tanaka asked. That's significant. He's coming to our territory. It's a sign of respect, Dr. Okonkwo said, or at least recognition that we're not going to come crawling to him. Either way, it's a good sign. Or it's a trap, General Morrison warned. We can't rule that out. No, we can't, Maria agreed. But we also can't refuse without looking afraid. And after everything we've done to project confidence, we can't back down now. She took a deep breath. Set up a meeting, somewhere public, somewhere that can be broadcast to the entire galaxy. If we're going to make history, let's make sure everyone sees it. The location chosen was the UN General Assembly Hall in New York. It was symbolic, historic, and large enough to accommodate both human and Zarthek delegations. More importantly, it was equipped with broadcasting equipment that would transmit the proceedings to every corner of Earth, and through a special relay system humanity had hastily constructed, to receiving stations throughout the galaxy. Drakthor arrived 3 days later with a delegation of 20 officers, diplomats, and advisors. The transport ships landed at a designated site in Manhattan, and the aliens were escorted through streets lined with humans. Some watched in fear, others in curiosity. Many simply wanted to see what the beings who had threatened their world actually looked like. Maria met Drakthor at the entrance to the UN building. This time the handshake was more than a formality. It was a symbol being recorded by thousands of cameras and transmitted to billions of viewers across multiple species. Welcome to Earth, War Commander, Maria said. I hope this meeting proves more productive than our previous communications. As do I, Secretary General, Drakthor replied. His translator device rendered his words in perfect English. I come. Today, not as a conqueror, but as a representative of my people seeking understanding with yours. The words were formal, scripted, and absolutely necessary. Both sides knew that every word spoken here would be analyzed, debated, and remembered for generations. The actual negotiations took place over the next 18 hours. Both sides had prepared extensively. The humans brought legal experts, economists, scientists, and cultural advisors. The Zarthek brought their own specialists, along with secure communication links to Imperial High Command for consultation on major points. The proposed treaty was complex, but its core principles were simple. Earth would remain independent. No Imperium laws would apply to human space. No Imperial forces would be stationed in the solar system. Humans would govern themselves entirely. In exchange, Earth would recognize the Imperium as a legitimate galactic power. Humans would not interfere with Imperial internal affairs. Trade would be conducted fairly and openly. And most importantly, humans would not actively encourage rebellion among Imperial subjects. This last point caused the most debate. Ambassador Okoye argued passionately that humanity should not agree to suppress freedom movements. Drakthor countered that the Imperium would not accept a treaty that empowered rebellion. The compromise came from an unexpected source. Dr. Okonkwo suggested language that committed humanity to not actively encouraging or materially supporting internal conflicts within the Imperium, but did not prevent humans from sharing information about political systems, governance models, and historical examples of peaceful reform. In other words, Velkera said slowly, you will not give weapons to rebels, but you will give them ideas. Ideas are not weapons, Dr. Okonkwo replied innocently. They're just information. What people do with information is their choice. Drakthor and his advisors conferred privately for nearly an hour on this point. When they returned, Drakthor's expression was carefully neutral. The Imperium accepts this language. But be aware, humans, that ideas can be more dangerous than weapons. We're counting on it, Maria said with a slight smile. Other provisions were added. Earth would be permitted to explore and colonize space freely, as long as they did not encroach on Imperial territory without permission. Cultural and scientific exchanges would be encouraged. An embassy exchange would be established within one Earth year. Trade agreements would be negotiated separately, but would be based on mutual benefit rather than tribute. The most controversial provision from the human side was one Drakthor insisted upon. Humanity would share its military technologies and tactical innovations with the Imperium. You want us to give you the weapons we developed to fight you? General Morrison asked incredulously. We want you to acknowledge that cooperation benefits both sides, Drakthor replied. Your defensive innovations are impressive. They would enhance Imperial capabilities. In exchange, we will share selected Imperial technologies with you. Faster-than-light communication, advanced material science, medical techniques. Both sides become stronger through cooperation. It was, Maria realized, a brilliant move. It transformed the relationship from adversarial to collaborative. It gave both sides a reason to maintain peace beyond mere fear of conflict. We'll agree to share military technologies, she said carefully, on the condition that the Imperium also shares educational and civilian technologies, and that this exchange is voluntary on both sides. No forced technology transfers. Agreed, Drakthor said immediately. As the negotiations continued, something unexpected happened. The delegations began to relax. Jokes were made. Stories were shared. Krelmar became fascinated with human coffee and spent 20 minutes discussing the chemical properties of caffeine with a human biochemist. Velkara challenged General Morrison to a strategic game called chess and was surprised when she lost. The barriers between species began to crack just slightly. On the 18th hour of negotiations, the final treaty language was agreed upon. Both sides reviewed it one last time. Maria looked at the document that represented humanity's first formal agreement with an alien civilization. It was not perfect. There were ambiguities that would need to be resolved later. But it was a foundation for peace. Are we ready to sign? She asked her delegation. Around the table, exhausted humans nodded. They had fought for every word, every clause, every provision. The treaty protected Earth's independence while opening doors to the galaxy. The Imperium is prepared to sign, Drakthor announced. The signing ceremony was brief but historic. Maria and Drakthor approached a table set in the center of the General Assembly Hall. Behind them, their respective delegations stood witness. Around them, cameras recorded every moment for transmission across the galaxy. This treaty represents a new path forward, Maria said, speaking to both the assembled crowd and the billions watching remotely. For millennia, the Zarthek Imperium has expanded through conquest. Today they have chosen expansion through cooperation. This is not weakness. It is wisdom. It is the recognition that strength comes in many forms, and the strongest form of all is the choice to make friends instead of subjects. She signed the treaty with a pen made specifically for this occasion, crafted from materials representing every continent on Earth. Drakthor stepped forward next. The Imperium has always valued order, strength, and unity. Today, we recognize that these values can be achieved through partnership as well as dominance. Humanity has taught us that some species are more valuable as equals than as subjects. We acknowledge this truth and embrace this new relationship. He placed his mark on the treaty using a Zarthek signing device that burned the symbol into the document with light. The General Assembly Hall erupted in applause. Humans cheered. Some cried. Others simply looked stunned that this was really happening. They had gone from facing annihilation to establishing diplomatic relations in less than 6 weeks. But the real reaction came from across the galaxy. As word of the treaty spread, species throughout the Imperium and beyond responded with shock, hope, and in some cases fear. The Imperium had recognized another species as an equal. The precedent was set. On the Imperium homeworld, Supreme Commander Malketh watched the signing ceremony and allowed himself a rare smile. The Council had gambled on a new approach, and it had succeeded. Yes, there would be complications. Yes, some subject species would ask why they could not have similar arrangements. But those were problems that could be managed with wisdom rather than force. The Imperium had ruled through fear for 12,000 years. Perhaps it was time to try ruling through respect. Back on Earth, as the celebrations began, and the Zarthek delegation prepared to return to orbit, Maria stood at the window of her office once again. The alien ships were still there, but they no longer cast shadows of threat. Now they were simply ships. Someday soon they would leave. And someday after that, human ships would visit the Imperium's worlds as guests rather than invaders. Did we just change the galaxy? Ambassador Okoye asked, standing beside her. No, Maria said thoughtfully. We just showed the galaxy that change is possible. What happens next is up to everyone else. Dr. Okonkwo joined them at the window. The Imperium's subjects are watching us. They're asking questions. Some of them are already discussing reform. We've started something we can't control. Good, Maria said. The best kind of change is the kind that spreads on its own. We didn't defeat the Imperium. We infected it with an idea. The idea that there are alternatives to conquest. That's worth more than any military victory. As night fell over New York, the alien ships in orbit began to move, not to attack but to reorganize. Some would leave to carry the news of the treaty back to Imperial High Command. Others would remain as the first elements of a permanent diplomatic presence. The standoff was over. A new relationship had begun, and across the galaxy, on hundreds of worlds, people looked at the news broadcasts and wondered, if humanity could negotiate with the Imperium as equals, what did that mean for everyone else? The answer would take time to unfold. But the question alone was revolutionary. Humanity had met the Empire and laughed. And in laughing, they had taught the galaxy to question the assumptions that had held for millennia. Sometimes the most powerful weapon is not a gun or a bomb, but simply the courage to say no and mean it. The stars were watching, and they had just learned something new about what was possible. 6 months after the treaty was signed, the galaxy was a different place. Not dramatically different, not obviously different, but different in the small ways that eventually become large ways, the kind of difference that starts as whispers and becomes movements. The Zarthek Imperium Embassy on Earth had been established in Geneva, Switzerland. The building was an architectural compromise, human construction methods with Zarthek aesthetic preferences. It stood as a symbol of cooperation, though the symbol was more complicated than either side had anticipated. Ambassador Krelmar, the former science officer from the Eternal Dominion, had been chosen as the Imperium's first ambassador to Earth. It was a controversial appointment within the Imperium. Many argued that a military officer was inappropriate for a diplomatic post, but Krelmar had been the one who first advocated for understanding humanity rather than simply conquering it. That made him, in Supreme Commander Malketh's words, the only one qualified for this impossible job. On this particular morning, Krelmar sat in his office reviewing reports from across the galaxy. What he read troubled him, though he was careful not to show it when his human liaison officer entered for their daily briefing. "Good morning, Ambassador," said Jennifer Torres, a former State Department official who had been assigned to help the Zarthek adjust to Earth. "How are you settling in?"
I am well, though I confess I still find your coffee unsettling.
"It should not be possible for a beverage to be both essential and unpleasant," Jennifer laughed. "That's the point. You're learning. What's on the agenda today? Krelmar hesitated, then decided honesty was appropriate. I need to discuss a sensitive matter with Secretary General Chen. The treaty is causing complications throughout the Imperium that neither side anticipated. What kind of complications? The kind that start with questions and end with change. Come, let us go together. This concerns both our peoples. An hour later, Krelmar sat in Maria Chen's office along with key members of the UN leadership. The atmosphere was tense. Everyone knew that when an Imperial ambassador requested an urgent meeting, it meant something significant had happened. Thank you for seeing me on short notice, Krelmar began. I need to inform you of developments within the Imperium that relate directly to Earth's actions over the past 6 months. Developments? Maria prompted carefully. Rebellions, Krelmar said bluntly, or more precisely, demands for reform. 7 Imperial subject species have formally petitioned the High Command Council for treaty relationships similar to Earth's. 12 others have begun organized movements advocating for greater autonomy, and in 3 cases there have been actual uprisings that required military intervention. The room fell silent. This was both expected and feared. The treaty with Earth had been intended to stabilize one situation, but it had destabilized dozens of others. I'm sorry to hear that, Maria said carefully, but I'm not sure what you expect us to do about it. The treaty specifically states that we will not interfere in Imperium internal affairs. And you have honored that commitment, Krelmar acknowledged. Humans have not provided weapons to rebels. You have not sent agents to stir up dissent. You have not violated the letter of our agreement. However, we've been talking, Dr. Okonkwo finished. We've been sharing our history, our philosophy, our way of thinking about government and freedom. Information, not weapons, precisely. And that information is spreading throughout the galaxy faster than any military force could move. Your internet broadcasts, your academic papers, your entertainment media, all of it is being accessed by species throughout the Imperium. They are learning about democracy, about human rights, about the concept that government should serve the people rather than the people serving the government. Ambassador Okoye leaned forward. Ambassador Krelmar, with all due respect, ideas are not a violation of our treaty. We agreed not to support rebellion. We did not agree to stop being who we are. I know, Krelmar said, and there was something in his tone that was not accusatory. That is why I am here to talk, not to threaten. The High Command Council is divided on how to respond to this situation. Some wish to crack down harder on dissent. Others argue that suppression will only make things worse. A few are even suggesting that the Imperium itself needs to reform. And what do you think? Maria asked. Krelmar was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his words were careful. I think that 12,000 years is a long time to do things the same way. I think that humanity has shown us that there are alternatives we never considered. And I think that change, when it comes after such a long period of stasis, is inevitably chaotic. The question is not whether the Imperium will change, but how it will change. Violently or peacefully. Through reform or revolution. What are you asking from us? General Morrison asked. Cooperation. Again. The Imperium is facing something it has never faced before. The need to evolve. We need help. Not military help, but guidance, examples, evidence that change can be managed without collapse. Dr. Okonkwo spoke up. You want us to help the Imperium reform itself? That's an extraordinary request. It is an extraordinary situation. And before you answer, let me be clear about something. The High Command Council has not authorized me to make this request. This is my own initiative based on my understanding of both human and Zarthek cultures. If you refuse, I will not report this conversation. If you agree, I will present it to the Council as a joint proposal. But I believe this is the path forward that causes the least suffering. Maria exchanged glances with her colleagues. This was unprecedented. An Imperial ambassador asking humanity for help in reforming his own empire. It was either a trap or a genuine cry for assistance. She had to decide which. Give us a day to discuss this, she said finally. This is not a decision we can make impulsively. The debate that followed was intense. Some argued that this was exactly what humanity should want. The chance to reshape the galaxy's dominant power into something less oppressive. Others warned that involvement in imperial politics could backfire catastrophically. Still others questioned whether it was humanity's place to interfere at all. Ambassador Tanaka summarized the core dilemma succinctly. We wanted to be left alone. Now we have the chance to influence how half the galaxy is governed. That's a responsibility we never asked for. But it's a responsibility we created, Dr. Okonkwo countered. By standing up to the Imperium, by forcing them to negotiate, by sharing our ideas, we set this in motion. We can't just walk away from the consequences. Why not? General Morrison challenged. We signed a treaty to protect Earth. Our obligation is to our own world, not to fixing an alien empire's problems. Our world is part of a galaxy now, Maria said quietly. We can't pretend otherwise. The question is what kind of galactic neighbors we want to be. Isolated, opportunistic, or engaged and helpful. In the end, the vote was close, but the decision was made. Humanity would help, but on specific terms. They would provide advisory support only. They would share information and examples from human history. They would offer suggestions for peaceful reform, but they would not make decisions for the Imperium, would not take sides in imperial politics, and would withdraw immediately if the situation became violent. When Krelmar returned the next day, Maria presented him with a formal proposal. We'll help, she said, but we need something in return. What do you need? Transparency. If we're going to advise on reform, we need to understand the Imperium completely. Full access to information about how your government works, how decisions are made, what your subject species actually want. No secrets. No hidden agendas. We can't help fix something we don't understand. Krelmar considered this. Such openness was almost unthinkable in Imperial culture. But he was asking for something equally unprecedented. I will present this to the High Command Council. I believe they will accept, though it will take time to implement. We have time, Maria said. Change should be slow anyway. Quick revolutions tend to be bloody. The message Krelmar sent to the High Command Council caused an immediate crisis. Half the council wanted to recall him for exceeding his authority. The other half saw the wisdom in his approach. The debate raged for 3 days before Supreme Commander Malketh broke the deadlock. The human ambassador makes a fair point, Malketh announced to the assembled council. If we are to reform, we must understand what reform means. And humanity has extensive experience in this area, both successes and failures. Let them teach us what they know. The final decisions will still be ours, but their perspective could prevent catastrophic mistakes. Commander Sarvax disagreed strongly. We are asking our enemies to help us change our most fundamental structures. This is insanity. Humanity is not our enemy, Malketh corrected. They are our partners. And partners help each other. That is the entire point of the treaty we signed. We chose cooperation over conquest. Now we must trust that choice, even when it is uncomfortable. The vote was 4-3 in favor of accepting human assistance. It was not overwhelming support, but it was enough. Over the following months, an unprecedented collaboration began. Human experts in political science, economics, sociology, and history traveled to imperial worlds as advisors. They studied the Imperium's structures, interviewed subject species, and analyzed centuries of policy decisions. What they found was both impressive and troubling. The Imperium was efficient, organized, and stable. It provided security and basic services to billions of beings. Starvation was rare. Major wars were non-existent within Imperial space. Crime was low. By many measures, it was successful. But it was also rigid, unresponsive to local needs, and completely top-down in its decision-making. Subject species had no voice in policies that affected them. Innovation was discouraged in favor of stability. Individual freedom was sacrificed for collective order. It's like Rome, Dr. Okonkwo explained in one of the joint sessions between human advisors and imperial administrators. An empire that brought peace and prosperity, but also oppression and stagnation. The question is whether you can reform Rome without destroying it. Can it be done? Asked Administrator Thelkor, a mid-level imperial official who had become one of the key points of contact. It's been tried, Dr. Okonkwo said. Sometimes it works. Sometimes it doesn't. The British Empire gradually transformed into a commonwealth of independent nations. The Soviet Union collapsed when reform came too slowly. The key difference was usually whether the leadership was willing to share power voluntarily. The High Command Council will not surrender power, Thelkor said flatly. They don't have to surrender it all at once. They can devolve it gradually. Create local councils that handle local issues. Allow subject species to have representatives in decision-making bodies. Start with small reforms and build from there. Change doesn't have to be revolutionary. It can be evolutionary. These conversations happened hundreds of times across dozens of worlds. Human advisors worked alongside Imperial administrators, not replacing them but challenging them to think differently. It was frustrating for both sides. Humans found the Imperial bureaucracy maddeningly slow. Imperials found human ideas chaotic and impractical. But slowly, changes began to appear. The first major reform came 8 months after the treaty signing. The High Command Council announced the creation of advisory assemblies on all major Imperial worlds. These assemblies would have no legal power, but they would provide feedback on Imperial policies. Subject species would elect representatives to these assemblies. It was a small step, almost meaningless in practical terms, but it was the first time in Imperial history that subject species had any formal voice at all. The announcement caused mixed reactions. Some saw it as inadequate tokenism. Others saw it as the beginning of real change. Humans saw it as a test case. If the assemblies worked, more reforms would follow. If they failed, the reform movement would stall. In the first elections for these assemblies, turnout was massive. Species that had never been asked their opinion on anything suddenly had a chance to choose representatives. The voting process was chaotic and the assemblies were inefficient, but they existed. That alone was revolutionary. Earth's embassy to the Imperium had been established on the Imperial capital world of Zarthek Prime. The human ambassador was former General Morrison, who had surprised everyone by accepting the position. Know your enemy, he had explained. Or in this case, know your partner. Same principle. Morrison sent regular reports back to Earth describing the changes he was witnessing. It's like watching a glacier melt, one report read. You can't see it happening moment to moment, but when you compare last month to this month, the difference is undeniable. The Imperium is changing whether it wants to or not. The question is whether it changes fast enough to satisfy the reformers without changing so fast that it collapses. On Earth, humanity watched these developments with mixed feelings. Some were proud that their influence was spreading positive change. Others worried about unintended consequences. Still others questioned whether humanity had the right to reshape alien civilizations at all. The debate played out in universities, media broadcasts, and public forums across the planet. It was messy and contentious, which was exactly what Maria Chen hoped for. We should question ourselves, she said in one interview. The moment we become certain that we're right about everything is the moment we become just another empire. A year after the treaty signing, representatives from 17 species throughout the Imperium traveled to Earth for an informal conference. It was not sanctioned by the High Command Council, though they had been informed and had not objected. The conference's purpose was simple: to share experiences and strategies for reform. The gathering took place in Geneva, in the same building where the original treaty had been signed. Species that had never been allowed to communicate freely with each other now sat together, discussing common problems and potential solutions. Humans facilitated the discussions but tried not to dominate them. On the final day of the conference, a young delegate from a species called the Velnari stood to speak. Her name was Celira, and her people had been conquered by the Imperium 800 years earlier, one of the longest-held subject species. I want to thank humanity, Celira said, her voice translated by the same technology that had once delivered Imperial ultimatums. Not for solving our problems. You have not done that, but for showing us that problems can be solved. For 12,000 years we believed the Imperium was inevitable, permanent, unchangeable. Then you arrived and laughed at that assumption. You showed us that nothing is inevitable, that even the greatest empire must change when circumstances demand it. You gave us hope. That is worth more than any weapon or technology. The applause that followed was not just from humans but from representatives of 24 species. It was a moment of genuine connection across the boundaries of biology and culture. War Commander Drakthor, who had attended the conference as an observer, watched this moment with complex emotions. He had been the one sent to conquer Earth. Instead, Earth had conquered something he had not known was vulnerable: the idea that the Imperium's way was the only way. After the conference, Drakthor requested a private meeting with Maria Chen. They met in a quiet garden in the embassy grounds, a space designed to be comfortable for both human and Zarthek physiologies. I have been thinking about our first conversation, Drakthor said without preamble. When I demanded your surrender and you laughed. I was offended, confused, I thought you were foolish. And now? Maria asked. Now I understand. You were not laughing at my threat. You were laughing at the absurdity of it, the idea that any species would simply surrender their freedom because a bigger gun arrived. You knew something I did not, that there are things worth more than survival, that dignity and autonomy matter, that a galaxy ruled by fear is not a galaxy worth ruling. We also knew we might lose, Maria admitted. We were terrified, actually. The laughter was partially hysteria. But yes, we knew we had to try, because if we surrendered without trying, we would not have been human anymore. Drakthor was quiet for a long moment, looking up at the stars that were just becoming visible in the evening sky. The Imperium will not be the same in 100 years. The changes have begun. They cannot be stopped. Some of my people view this as a tragedy, the end of our great civilization. And what do you think? I think that civilizations which cannot adapt do not deserve to survive. I think that 12,000 years of conquest have made us strong but also brittle. And I think that humanity, in refusing to be conquered, may have saved us from our own obsolescence. Maria smiled. That's very philosophical for a war commander. I am an ambassador now, Drakthor replied. Apparently that requires philosophy. Humans have taught me this, along with many other uncomfortable lessons. They stood in comfortable silence for a while, two beings from different worlds who had become unlikely colleagues in reshaping the galaxy. What happens next? Drakthor finally asked. More of the same, I expect, Maria said. More reforms, more debates, more mistakes and corrections. Change is never neat, but change is also never finished. We'll figure it out as we go, together. Together, Drakthor repeated. The word felt foreign in his mouth, but also right. Yes, that is the new way. As night fell over Geneva and across the galaxy, millions of beings continued their daily lives. The seeds of transformation continued to grow. Some would bear fruit quickly. Others would take generations. Some would fail entirely. But the process itself was now irreversible. Humanity had met the Empire and laughed. In that laughter was not mockery but recognition. Recognition that the universe is too vast and too complex for any single system to be correct. That diversity is strength. That cooperation is wiser than conquest. That the courage to change is greater than the stubbornness to stay the same. The galaxy was watching, and it was learning, not from humanity's weapons or technology, but from humanity's simple, stubborn insistence that there are always alternatives, that a better way is always possible, that the future does not have to be a continuation of the past. It would take time. It would be messy. It would be difficult and uncomfortable and occasionally disastrous, but it would also be real change, driven not by force but by choice. And in the end, that made all the difference. The stars continued to shine, indifferent to the small dramas being played out beneath them. But on the worlds that orbited those stars, beings looked up and saw not inevitability but possibility, not fate but choice. Humanity had not conquered the galaxy. They had done something far more dangerous and far more powerful. They had given it hope, and hope, once released, cannot be contained.